Hello. It is Tuesday. Let's do this. We're going to start looking at the French and Indian War today and really the things that led to it. This is going to be one of the big build-ups to the American Revolution. I'm going to start where we stopped yesterday, and kind of hit on these scientists. This is a part of the Enlightenment era. If you remember yesterday, we looked at the Great Awakening, which was the religious revival in the colonies. We kind of talked about the Middle Passage. And we ended with the Great Enlightenment, which was the science revival, if you will, or really the birth of modern science and thinkers. Here's just a list of some scientists who had some of the largest impacts on our modern science we learned in school. One of which was... Let me turn some music down. One of which was actually Copernicus, which was a astronomy-based astrophysicist. He looked at space and science with the stars and physics and all that. Galileo, who was probably one of the most famously known. He invented a telescope. He looked and discovered the planets. He actually stared at the sun and discovered that there's sunspots, also going blind from doing that. And he would also be imprisoned by the Catholic Church because he introduced ideas that were against of the teachings of the time. Francis Bacon is another one. René Descartes, he was actually a really big philosopher. Someone asked a question on their exit ticket yesterday of what is a philosopher. Basically, we don't really learn too much philosophy in middle school because developmentally your brains aren't there yet to understand philosophy. Again, that doesn't make you dumb. It just means you're not cognitively there yet. You will be starting to get there in high school. But philosophy is basically a belief or idea that you can explain through reasoning and logic and thoughts. A lot of the times it's abstract. So I'll give you one quick example. I believe it was Aristotle or Plato. Both were Greek philosophers who basically said, we are just shadows on a wall, a reflection of a fire. Yeah, like I said, philosophy can be very confusing for a middle schooler. As you get kind of older and older and older, it becomes a lot easier to understand. And of course, Isaac Newton is one of the last gentlemen we talked about yesterday who gets credit for our modern understanding of gravity. What a guy. All right, let us start with looking at the French and Indian War, known as the 7 Years' War, which lasted 9 years. Math. And this is actually going to be one of the first world wars. This war not only be fought mostly here in the colonies between France and England, but also big wars that take place in Europe at the same time. But we're going to focus on what happened here in the colonies. First things first, make sure you have your notebook out. You're going to write these down. And tomorrow I'll have you finish up just the last bit of this, but we're going to get a good chunk of this done here today. All right. Our 7 Years' War. What's going to happen? Well, we're going to start seeing tensions rise between Native Americans and New England colonies. So remember, our New England colonies are the northernmost colonies, and the Wampanoag are the Native Americans who these two are going to come into contact with. Part of the problem, and this is going to be a continuous theme through U.S. history, colonists, settlers are going to move west, and they're going to be moving on to Native American lands. In this era, the King of England recognized, and the French recognized lands belonging to Native Americans. Colonists didn't necessarily honor these ideas. King Philip, who's drawn over here, better known as Chief Metacomet, was against colonists moving onto their lands. He gained the name King Philip to become his white title, but his Native American name, he was a chief, and his name was Metacomet. And because people continuously move on his land, basically moving in his house without his permission, he's going to actually go to war over these problems. And the colonial militia are going to end up fighting against Native American warriors. One thing to keep in mind when you hear of colonial militia, these are not professional soldiers, these are citizen soldiers who are fighting. And on both sides, they are going to attack cities, which will result in men, women, and children being killed. So Native American tribes will be attacking settlements, and settlers will be attacking Native American tribes, and killing women and children included. And when fighting finally ended, about 600 colonists would be killed and 1,300 Native Americans. And King Philip was killed in these conflicts. Pause it here if you're still writing. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So, those tensions we just saw there was early tensions you're seeing between British, if you will, the colonies, and Native Americans. And these tensions are going to be continuously rising more and more. The French are going to become good allies with a lot of Native American tribes that we're about to see here. And the English won't be completely hated, but they won't be as accepted or appreciated by Native Americans. Some Native Americans, however, are going to ally with colonies for trade. So much like we saw in America's Story of Us, that tribe helped those early pilgrims, helped them learn how to farm, and traded with them. Native Americans are going to want tools, weapons, and other goods. Those are going to be some things they're going to focus on trying to trade for. We're also going to see colonists wanting to purchase or trade for furs, because furs are going to sell for tons of money back in Europe. Native Americans, in some early cases, don't realize the value of those furs, and the colonists aren't necessarily going to tell them either, because they want to make as much money as they can. The French, leading up to our war here, the French and Indian War, are going to ally with the Huron and Algonquin tribes. If you've ever heard of Lake Huron, it's in up north by Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. That's where that tribe was from originally. And our English are going to ally with the Iroquois League. And the Iroquois League was actually an alliance of Native American tribes led by the Iroquois Nation, which was one of the largest tribes in like the central eastern part of the United States at that time. And the French overall here in the New World had smaller settlements. So they didn't send as many French people to go settle in the New World. They had small trading posts, which means the Native Americans actually trusted the French a little bit more. They liked them more because they didn't see them as invading their land. They saw them actually as being interested in trading with them. Whereas the English had large settlements, large cities. They kept having more and more people arriving. They're growing quickly. They're seen more as a threat to Native Americans, that there's more and more settlers moving and pushing them off their land. Pause it here. I'm going to keep going then. So war is going to erupt between France and Great Britain. You might want to underline that part of your title. The French and Indian War was not France against Indians. It was not France against Indians. Nope. France and Great Britain are going to fight in this war. You might want to circle that, star that, bold it, highlight it, something, because it's very important for later. So we're going to start seeing growing tensions. And what's going to happen is first, France and Britain, Great Britain, are going to really compete for control in North America. We are in North America, by the way. The United States is in North America. They're competing for who owns the most land. The Ohio River Valley, which is really everything east of us and the East Coast. So everything east of the Mississippi, such as Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of that stuff, they're competing for control. Both of them want to run it because there's rich fur trade. If you owned that land, you also then make money off the taxes for trading furs. And the French are going to actually build 3 forts close to where the British are, and they're going to send an army over to take them over. So the French built forts as a way to kind of say, come at me, bro. And the English, well, they're going to go at them, bro. Go ahead and pause it here if you're still writing this. But I'm going to move on to our next slide. So here is a visual for you, kind of showing you where the Ohio River Valley was. So this is your disputed land. If you look closely, southern Illinois, here's Illinois, here's Ohio, and Indiana is about here. You got like Tennessee and Kentucky down here, and it goes all the way down to like New Orleans, to Louisiana, parts of like Mississippi and Arkansas. So this is what the war is primarily being fought over in the French and Indian War. All right. Lake Huron, by the way. So that tribe was up here around this lake. To our next slide. So war is going to erupt. And with the start of the war, here's what's going to happen. We're going to see young George Washington lead a much larger army against the French. At this time, I believe Washington was only a captain or a colonel maybe. And they are going to build a fort called Fort Necessity. They, as in George Washington and the British Army. And the French are going to end up attacking Fort Necessity, which will actually end up being a slaughter for George Washington and his troops. George Washington doesn't die, but he is defeated. And this is really where the war begins. This is the first battle of the French and Indian War. Which, remember, just because it's called the French and Indian War doesn't mean it's France against Indians. France did not fight Indians. The focus of the war was really France versus Great Britain, and both sides had Indians. But really, France and England or Great Britain are who are fighting in this war. You may want to highlight that again if you still haven't. That's going to be very important for later, just so you know. Moving on. A convention is going to end up being held in the colonies. And there's going to be talks of unifying the colonies through a plan that they call the Albany Plan. Go ahead and put a pause here if you are writing. I'm going to explain the Albany Plan next. All right, our Albany Plan was like so. This is also a political cartoon that would be used in the American Revolution, but Benjamin Franklin will actually create this idea of the Albany Plan. The whole concept was to no longer be separate colonial governments and states who only care about yourself, but to unify under one government to kind of become a country. Spoilers, it's not going to happen this early. But the whole idea through this political cartoon that Ben Franklin was arguing was, if we colonies work together, we'll be like a snake. We'll be dangerous and venomous. However, if we are divided, we are as deadly as a chopped up snake. So, obviously, if you got bit by the head of the snake, which was chopped up, you could still be poisoned. But the rest of the snake, worthless. Just worthless. So that was his argument, was unify as a colonial group of people into one government, we'll be able to defeat the French. If we don't unify and work together, we could very well lose and be taken over by the French. All right. Tomorrow, I'm going to have you take these last bit of notes, which is just going to look at the Treaty of Paris. And I'm also then going to have you look at the outcomes of the war. So we're going to kind of look at what was the peace deal, what were the terms, and what were the outcomes of the French and Indian War. All of these things are going to start leading to the tensions that ultimately lead to the American Revolution from England. All right. Don't forget to finish your journal question tonight and answer it in your journal, and then record yourself reading that journal entry on Flipgrid. And that is what I have for you. Have a rest. Have a rest. Have a great rest of your day. I will speak at you tomorrow. Bye.